Hey everyone, my name is Richard Kim. I'm a senior counselor here at Admission Masters. And today I want to talk with you guys about how you can build a winning college application. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. So a little bit of background on myself. I earned my bachelor's in political science and education studies from UCLA. I got my master's in higher education administration from the University of Pennsylvania. While I was there, I served as the graduate assistant at the Penn Law Admissions and Financial Aid Office. I was also the program coordinator for the Carey JD MBA program, which is a dual degree program between the Wharton School of Business and the Penn Law School. I was also an application reader for Yale, and I earned my college counseling certification from UCLA. I've been at Admission Masters for over 10 years now, and I'm excited to share some of the experience that I've gained with you guys here today so that you are as prepared as possible by the time you are working on your college applications. Before we get into some of the tips that I want to share with you guys, let's talk about the current landscape of college admissions. You guys probably already know that getting accepted to some of these universities is challenging, but you might not know exactly how difficult it's become. And I wanted to just kind of share some of these numbers with you, not to scare you, but to really just help you understand really how difficult it has been and how it's continuing to get more difficult over the years to get into these schools. So you can notice at the very top here, obviously for schools like Caltech, Ivy League colleges, of course, it's very difficult, but their acceptance rates right now are hovering at about 3%. Even liberal arts colleges like Swarthmore are at about 7%. Public schools, including UCLA, UC Berkeley, are around 10% acceptance rates. And UCSD, Irvine, and Santa Barbara are really not far behind. It is unfortunate, but as things have gotten a little bit more challenging to be admitted to colleges, it's become more important than ever to just really make sure that your applications are as standout as possible, to really make sure that you are putting yourself in a position to be a more unique, a more compelling candidate by the time that you submit your applications to these colleges. So there's several different types of applications that you guys will need to prepare. The first one, the most popular one that you'll very likely be using for the majority of your colleges will be the common application. The common application you'll be using to apply for the Ivy League schools, for schools like University of Michigan, USC, for example. Again, this is the most popular type, but it's not the only application likely that you'll be submitting for California students, but really for kind of anyone, anyone who's applying to the UCs, you'll have to do a separate application for the UCs. And then there are some individual applications that you'll also have to finish depending on the colleges that you end up applying for. So if you're planning to apply to MIT, if you're planning to apply for Georgetown, for example, unfortunately, each of these colleges have their own applications that you have to finish on top of the UC application and the common application. Now, these applications do share things in common. When you're working on any sort of college application, typically there will be some shared components. So first and foremost, of course, you'll be putting in your personal information, very basic information like your address and phone number. But the more important things, of course, the things that as an admissions officer, we're paying a lot of attention to in your applications, we'll be looking at your academic records. Typically, that would mean that we're seeing the classes that you've taken and the grades that you've earned from freshman year till the time that you apply. We're also looking at your standardized test scores. For the UCs, it's not as important since they're test blind. So they don't look at your SAT or ACT scores, but they still have a component of their application where they allow you to submit AP exams. And then, of course, for common application schools, schools like MIT and Georgetown, they are going to allow you to share your SAT and ACT exams if you have them. And for some colleges now, especially some of these very prestigious ones like Brown, for example, they are reinstating their standardized testing policies, meaning it is now once again required for you to have an SAT, ACT, or for a lot of colleges, AP scores to submit if you want to be even considered for their college. They're also going to be looking at your extracurricular activities. For the common application, they give you a space to put up to 10 activities, and they want you to order them from most meaningful from number 1 to least meaningful at number 10. So they give you those 10 spaces. For the UC application, They give you 20 spaces for activities and awards. And for the most part, we like to see our students trying to fill up those spaces as much as possible by the time they're submitting those applications. Then you have your essays. For the common application, you have a 650-word personal statement, which is the story that you want to share with your colleges that should really encapsulate something about you that you feel like is so important that you needed to share it with your schools. For the UCs, you have 4 personal insight questions, which are 4 350-word essays that you need to finish and submit. And those would be sent to every single UC. So there's not different sets of essays for the UC colleges. And then you also have supplemental essays that you need to be submitting depending on where you're applying. If you're applying to, for example, U Michigan, you have 2 more essays to finish. If you're applying to Columbia, you have 6 more essays to finish. Stanford, Princeton, and Yale each have 8 more supplemental essays to complete. So obviously, these will be, very significant components of your application that you really want to make sure are as strong as possible and really, again, share pieces of who you are that you feel like your colleges need to be aware of. Then you have letters of recommendation. Again, this is kind of different depending on the school. A lot of public schools, including the UCs, do not look at recommendation letters. They don't accept recommendation letters. They might request it after you apply. So this has been the case for schools like UC Berkeley. It doesn't happen often. Typically, it's if you are kind of on the brink of like waitlist or rejection or acceptance or waitlist, they might want to see some recommendation letters to get a better sense of who you are and your candidacy. But for the most part, you're not sending recommendation letters to colleges like the UCs, but for a lot of other colleges, you are. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few moments. Similarly, interviews are the same. If you're applying to the UCs, you're not doing interviews. You don't have to submit interviews for the majority of colleges. Actually, you don't have to do interviews, rather, for the majority of colleges. But for a lot of private schools, they will give you the options to do these. I'm not going to get into this later on because I feel like this isn't something, again, that you need to worry about for most schools. I will say briefly here, there are colleges that do offer something called post-application interviews, which are interviews that you will be contacted to sign up for after you apply. So for those colleges, as of now, you probably don't really need to worry. But then there's another subset of colleges that are offering something called a pre-application interview. And a pre-application interview is exactly what it sounds like. It's an interview that you can do now before you end up applying to colleges. So if you guys are current, rising seniors, I highly recommend that you check to see if your schools are offering interviews that you can sign up for now over the summer or even into the fall semester of your school year. Because if they give you these opportunities and you do not take advantage of them, that is a huge missed opportunity, right? You want to make sure that you are taking advantage of these things because they really can improve your chances of getting accepted to these colleges. So once again, check to see if your colleges are offering pre-application interviews. Most colleges don't, but a few select ones do. And if you guys are planning to apply for liberal arts colleges like the Claremont Consortium, Occidental, for example, these colleges are offering pre-application interviews over the summer as well. Again, I won't talk about interviews too much in today's seminar, but I will touch on each of these various components now. So let's talk about what these components look like and what are some things to consider as you're working on these various facets of your application to, again, make sure that your application is as strong as possible by the time that you apply. The first hurdle that you're expected to jump when you're applying for colleges is always going to be your academics. So I always like to say to get accepted to a school like Yale or UPenn, really any kind of selective college, having good academics, having a strong academic foundation is a necessary but not sufficient condition to get admitted to these schools. So what does that mean? Necessary but not sufficient. You need to have really good grades and you need to be taking tough classes to prove to your colleges that you are challenging yourself to do as much as you can to succeed and excel really academically. But even if you do, If you get straight A's in the hardest classes offered at your school, if you took additional courses outside of school at a community college to continuously challenge yourself, that's great. That itself will not get you admitted to these top tier colleges. Again, it's necessary. You have to do that to remain competitive. But again, that in and of itself is not the only thing that they're really considering. They then will be kind of paying a lot of attention to these next few factors we'll talk about. But like I said, this is that first hurdle, right? To be admitted to a school like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, you need to make sure that you are, number one, taking the most challenging courses that your school is offering. So if your school has a lot of AP options, IB courses that you could be taking, honors level courses you can take within your first 2 years of high school, typically, if you're not challenging yourself to take those courses, it is very difficult for you to demonstrate that you can excel at those colleges should you be admitted. So it's really important that you, again, demonstrate that you're willing to take on those courses. At the same time, however, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can balance your courses. So there's, a common question that I get from a lot of students and parents, which is, should I take is it better for me to take an AP class and get a B, or is it better for me to take a regular class and get an A? And the annoying answer that you're going to get a lot is it's always better to get the A in the AP class. And essentially what that means is, again, you need to make sure that you're not only taking these tough classes, but that you're also excelling within them. Both of those things matter. If you are taking a ton of AP classes and you're getting B's and C's, that's not demonstrating a lot to your colleges. In fact, it could end up hurting you if you keep doing that, because it kind of shows to your colleges that you don't know how to balance your courses. You don't know what is best for you and what you're able to handle. So a lot of times when you're kind of picking your courses, the rule of thumb I always give is take the hardest classes that you're confident you can get A's in. And if you feel like, well, maybe I'll end up getting a B in this class, maybe, it'll be a little bit challenging. If you're not quite certain, typically I'd want you to err on the side of trying that hard course to see if you can get those A's, as opposed to, forcing yourself to just do the easy classes and to just kind of settle for easy because that's going to be something that you can handle, right? So it's a little bit of a balancing act. You really want to make sure that, again, you're pushing yourself to take these tough courses, but you always got to ask yourself, what is it that I can really manage, especially as I start getting involved in more extracurricular activities, especially as I start, working on my college applications. All of these things are really strong considerations as you decide on your courses. You have to maintain a strong GPA within your courses. So time management matters. Being able to, develop strong study habits, learning to seek help when needed. This is something that I feel like not enough students are taking advantage of. In most cases, your high school teachers probably offer some form of office hours, whether they are clearly delineated times, like you can come in, between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. before school starts, whether it's during lunch or between classes, even if it's just like informal times after school, just going in to ask for help. I feel like not enough students are taking advantage of these opportunities. And that's problematic because, number one, you can learn a lot by attending these office hours, by talking with your teachers between classes, after class to learn more. But number two, it also is demonstrating to your teacher that you're making an effort to improve. And hopefully that means that your teacher will ideally be a little bit more lenient on you when they're grading your work, especially for more subjective classes like English, for example. But number three, if you're going to office hours and you're, again, demonstrating that you're working really hard to improve within the class, this sets yourself up for really strong teacher recommendations. And it's essentially, to me, a prerequisite of getting a strong recommendation letter that you are absolutely attending these office hours. So for multiple reasons, I feel like seeking that help when necessary, and especially if your parents have the financial means, maybe getting some tutoring help, it is really important that you're taking advantage of these opportunities, because that GPA, again, is such an important facet of your application. The standardized testing is going to be similar. So make sure, I usually recommend as early as possible, even if it's, freshman or sophomore year, but typically maybe as soon as you finish geometry, I do recommend that you prepare for the SAT and the ACT. And you don't want to prepare for both at the same time, right? That's not smart. You want to focus on the exam that you personally will do better on. The ACT actually has just come out with some updates on changes they're making starting from the spring of 2025. So the ACT is actually going to be shortening its exam. It used to be a 3-hour exam. Now it's going to be about a 2-hour exam. The ACT had a mandatory science section that is now becoming optional. And the English and writing section, they're also shortening. I think they're cutting out like 44 questions, and they're making it so that there are shorter passages for each of their writing sections. But that being said, preparing for one of these exams is a good idea, right? My recommendation typically is try a practice test for both, do a full length SAT, score it, the digital one now, and see how you're doing. Then the next weekend, take a full length practice ACT, score it, and see how you're doing. It is to your benefit to try both without, you don't want to commit to one without, again, trying both of these exams to figure out which one you're more comfortable with and the one that you feel like you can really excel in. You also want to make sure that you're preparing, obviously, for your AP exams, your AP class grades, and your AP exams. We're paying a lot of attention to. So, of course, we want to see that you're getting A's in your classes. But right after I see, okay, cool, this student got an A in AP biology, in AP English, AP US history. All right, let's see how they performed on their AP exams. We're hoping that you can demonstrate on a national level that you're very proficient in these subjects. And the only way we can really see that is by looking at your AP exam scores. So if we see that you've gotten threes for all of your APs, or if we even see that you didn't share some of your AP scores because you failed them or you just weren't prepared enough to take them, that's problematic, right? Yeah, you got an A in the class, which is great, but the test scores are not proving your proficiency within the subjects. And especially when that correlates with your major, that can be a problem. If you're a biology major and you got a 3 on your AP biology exam, that's going to be really tough for you to make up some ground for, because your peers who are applying as biology, one of the most popular majors for Asian students, your peers are going to be excelling in that subject, not just getting fives on their AP exams, but also being USABO semifinalists, the USA Biology Olympiad. They'll be semifinalists. They'll have a lot of very strong biology activities. So again, your test scores, your GPA, for all of these reasons, they're so important. And I start with this just because I want to make sure we're very clear that if setting your sights on getting into an Ivy League, to a Stanford, just any top 10, top 20 college, really, your GPA and your test scores are such a important component of your chances of being admitted. But like I said, it's not the only thing, right? Your academics are the first hurdle that you're expected to jump. If you jump it successfully, now we're paying a lot of attention to these other components, right? So we're going to be looking, of course, at your essays. And I already mentioned to you the differences in the types of essays that you'll be expected to be writing between the common application, the UC application. Regardless of which essay you're writing, there are some common components that I'd strongly recommend you kind of incorporate into your writing to make sure that they are as standout as possible. So number one, please make sure you're choosing the right topics. I have read, as an application reader for Yale, for example, I've read essays that had nothing to do with the student, which is very strange, right? I can see why some students who don't get support from counselors might do that, because one of the prompts that you get to choose from on the common application literally says, is there anything else you want to share? Like, tell us something else, write on any topic of your choice. So I'll have students submitting like creative writing topics, but that don't reflect their personal experiences. And that's not helping you, right? It's not helping you to really share a piece of yourself that will compel admissions officers to want to accept you. So you really need to make sure that your essay topic, of course, is focused on your story, but also you need to focus on unique aspects of your story. So you're really trying to think about unique qualities, perspectives, skills, talents, challenges that you feel like really separate yourself from your peers. That means that if your personal statement, you feel, I mean, I don't know if any of you guys are already working on your essays, but if you're going to write about immigrating to America and how you had to overcome a language barrier and, get used to the culture, if you want to write about playing an instrument, piano, violin, how it was hard at first, but eventually you succeeded, if you want to write about being bullied and how, again, that shaped your character, these are not helping to separate you from your peers. And I will go, I'll take that a step further and just say, that doesn't mean you can't write about those experiences, but you absolutely need to have a unique angle to those types of stories without being able to demonstrate those ways in which your experience as an immigrant or the ways in which your experience with music is different from every other student, especially every other Asian student. If you're not able to do that, it becomes so hard for you to really sell yourself to your admissions, right? So you got to make sure you're choosing that right topic. Really reflecting now, I think, is an important aspect of making sure that you can come up with that more compelling story, right? And this, of course, is very important for rising seniors. But if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior right now, I still encourage that. You should start reflecting, have a journal, write down stories, think about your experiences, ask yourself, who am I? How did my experiences really shape the person I am now, the voice that I have, the things that I care about? There are brainstorming tools you can find online very easily, but the brainstorming process it's never too early to start that brainstorming process. Once you have your topic, now you got to focus on your writing techniques. And in this case, there's I think a lot of mistakes that students make. A lot of times students want to write their stories by just showing off their accomplishments, right? Especially when parents are like, hey, talk about that gold medal that you earned, talk about that first place award that you earned. They feel like, I think a big mistake is they'll feel like the personal statement is really just a space to repeat what their application activities and awards will say. Why would we want that? Why would I want your essay to just tell me, oh, okay, so you won first place? Cool. I saw that earlier in your application. What else can you tell me about your experience that's important for us to know? Right. So you really want to make sure that your application essays are not just a reiteration of your resume. There has to be additional aspects to it that teach us something about you that should compel us to accept you. The component of storytelling and the authenticity of your essay also matters, right? When you're writing your essays, we don't want it to just be a response. We want it to be a narrative, right? You should have a compelling hook from the very beginning. You should be drawing us into the story, writing descriptively and in your own voice. And I feel like just, a little bit of a side note, I've been noticing more and more that students have been using AI, ChatGPT, to write their essays. And I can tell you now, if you're doing that, we can tell. It's pretty easy to tell in the majority of cases, at least, it's very easy to tell when you're just pulling from ChatGPT because honestly, it feels very soulless and it's not authentic. It doesn't feel like you're writing in your own genuine voice. And that's something that you really want to make sure shines on that application when you're writing your essays. So you want to make sure you're showing and not telling, right? You'll hear us at Admission Masters when we're working with students to say that a lot, right? We don't necessarily want you to just tell us what happened. I am the president of this club. I lead meetings and I do these fundraisers for our peers. You're not just telling us what you do. You want to show us that, right? Literally put the reader in your shoes, use very descriptive writing to try to make your story more compelling. There's a way to overdo that as well. So I think the balance kind of matters here where you're, still showing and writing descriptively without letting it become so fluffy that the actual like what we learn about you ends up being missing. But that is something that I feel like is one of the main tips that I give for students as you're doing your writing. Just make sure that you are doing more showing because typically that's something that's missing, especially again with a lot of Asian students writing. And then finally, you want to make sure that you're writing and rewriting after that, right? Every time you write a draft, make sure that you're actively seeking feedback, whether that's from counselors like us, whether that is from your English teacher, whether that is from a trusted peer, an older sibling. Seeking feedback is so, so important. And essays, to be honest, are sort of subjective, right? What one person might feel like is a fantastic essay, another person might feel like is kind of cliche. And that's why it's important to seek various pieces of feedback because that's reflective of the actual admissions process, right? Admissions officers are people. What one admissions officer might feel like is amazing and fantastic and great, another admissions officer again might not feel like is so great, right? So it's really important to kind of get that feedback, solicit it as much as you can, make revisions as necessary. That's I think the only way that you can really ensure that your essays can be as strong as possible. Then you have your activities. And I'm going to move a little quicker here because it seems like we're running out of time. But when we're building your activities, there's a few tips that I'll be giving to you. Number one, quality trumps quantity. I mentioned earlier that for the common application, they give you a space for 10 activities. For the UC application, they give you a space for 20 activities and awards. I do want you to try and fill that up as much as possible, but I'd much rather you have more meaningful activities and have strong leadership positions in them, making an impact through them. I'd rather you do that for a few select activities than to be involved in 20 activities with no leadership positions, literally just being a member. That's not doing you many favors, right? So superficial involvement in a lot of activities really doesn't do much for you. It's very much important that you are deeply involved within them. You also want to make sure that you're diversifying the types of activities that you get involved in. Starting with school clubs is great. And a lot of times being involved in a school club is the basis for more meaningful work, but there's a lot of other things you can be doing, right? There's sports, there's artwork, there is volunteer work, there are internship opportunities, research opportunities, there are amazing summer programs and internships that you can actually get involved in that can demonstrate your major related experience. If there's one takeaway that I'd want you guys to get from this outside of quality mattering, the second most important thing would be that colleges are paying a lot of attention to whether or not you've chased your passion for a particular field. In other words, if you are a biology major and you don't have bio experience other than being a part of the medical club at school, if that's the only thing, it's hard for us to really believe that this is something that you're committed to and something that you're passionate about. We want to see that you've had plentiful experience within the major that you're planning on pursuing, because it can really show us your initiative and your commitment and your passion. So that type of experience is something that I feel like, again, I usually see missing when I first meet with a student. And that's usually one of the first priorities for us, to try to build that major related experience. Again, that can happen through clubs, that can happen through independent projects, but also these summer programs and these internships, making sure that you're proving that you're trying to get more real world experience, and like honestly getting accepted to some specialized programs. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Research Science Institute, RSI, or the Summer Science Program. Like, some of these programs are so prestigious, to even just be admitted to them is such a huge boon to your applications. So having those summer program and internship experiences can be very helpful for your application as well. For recommendation letters, again, not every college will give you an opportunity to submit them, but for the most part, most colleges will, especially private schools. It's very important to choose your recommenders carefully. I think too many students overestimate how important it is that they get a recommendation letter from a teacher who's related to their major. It's interesting because a lot of times I'd rather, let's say, I'm just going to keep using biology as an example. If you're a biology major, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have a biology teacher's recommendation letter. Would that be helpful? Sure, if you're really close with that person. But the thing that matters more than anything when you're deciding on who to ask is, what will that recommender say for you? The quality of the recommendation letter matters more than anything else. So I'm actually fine with a biology major asking an English teacher and a history teacher for recommendations, if those two teachers knew them the best. This doesn't apply for every school. There's a few select schools like MIT, Caltech, Harvey Mudd, where you actually need to have one STEM recommendation and one humanities or social science recommendation. But in the vast majority of cases, when you're submitting recommendations, there are no requirements like these. So like I said, when you're choosing those recommenders, choose those people that you know the best, those who know you the best, and the ones that you feel like will write you the strongest recommendation letters. That's the most important quality to consider when asking for rec letters. When you request the recommendation letters, for those of you who are current seniors, if you haven't already asked your teachers, you better ask in the first few weeks of the fall semester, unless they tell you otherwise. But in most cases, I would want my students to ask about recommendations at the end of their junior years. Just give them a heads up. And then you would also be asking them again in the fall semester, just to remind them. And when you ask for these recommendation letters, make sure that you are asking them if there's anything they need from you. A lot of times teachers will give you a brag sheet or a questionnaire, something to fill out, where they want you to, write about yourself, so they can utilize pieces of that in their recommendation letters. So just make sure that you're thinking about these different things. Hopefully all of you have a resume. If you've not been working on a resume, you should start one now as well, because I would want you to give your resumes to your teachers for their recommendations. And some colleges will actually give you a space for you to give them resumes too. So this is another very important component. Start thinking about these things as you're working on your applications too. Once you're finished with everything, make sure that you take the time to proofread and edit. One of the worst things we can see is if we're going through your application and we just notice that there are grammar mistakes everywhere. There are components where I've had students where their parents have actually gone into their applications last minute to make adjustments, and then I review their applications. They never told me that they made these changes, and there's just grammar mistakes. Like everything is perfectly fine. Their essays were fine, everything. And then I look at their additional information section and it looks like their parents wrote it for them. That's a huge problem, right? Why would a college admissions officer want to see that? So you really want to make sure that every component of your application is error-free. Seek feedback from trusted advisors. Make sure that you're asking people to review your applications whenever you make edits, especially to ensure that everything is looking good to go, that you have not made any mistakes. And of course, double check every deadline. There are early deadlines, early action, early decision that you should take advantage of, hopefully, where the applications could be due as early as October. There are merit scholarship deadlines for schools like Boston College, Boston University, for schools like Claremont McKenna College. And there are music and art portfolio deadlines for supplements like Stanford, for example. Typically, it's due a month earlier if you're planning on submitting those supplements. So please make sure that you are using those application portals effectively, double checking all of your deadlines. The worst thing you can do, honestly, is miss a deadline, because that means that you'll just not even be considered whatsoever. All right. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. I know I didn't have that much time. I had to move kind of quickly, but if you guys click on this or take a picture of this QR code, it should take you to our homepage, and feel free to sign up for a free 1 hour consultation with our counselors, so we can help answer any of your questions. All right. Thank you so much.